Hello investors and welcome back to Just Randy Stocks. Let's talk about Proterra, or ticker symbol PTRA. For those of you that are new to the channel, welcome. I like this stock a lot. This is the year of Proterra. I was telling everyone that the entry price, the low entry price for this was in the $8 range. We marked this at $8.80. Some people got in, some people cost average down, and they are seeing those gains this year. And I want to talk about this price action. We're going to go through the technical analysis. I'm going to explain why the price is moving the way it is. I believe it's now responding to news, and it looks like it's in an uptrend. We're going to go through the business overview, tip ranks, Barron report. I want to talk about the board of directors, but I'm doing two videos. This video to explain the timestamps that are in the Q3 earnings video, because if you're going to prepare yourself for Q4 and you're really going to understand this company, I want to make sure you understand everything that happened in Q3. That's going to get you prepared for Q4 to be able to listen to that call and understand all of that information. So if you want to hear about that, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content. Give the video a big thumbs up and stay tuned. Let's get straight into it. So Proterra has three business segments: powered, transit, and energy. And the reason this is important because I want you to understand the revenue breakup. And transit is 80% of the revenue, and I expect that there is going to be a narrative shift this year with powered and energy, specifically powered because the battery systems and charging solutions and software solutions, I expect them to grow. Battery systems, I think it's going to double this year. They're making huge investments, and we'll talk more about that. Now, 80% here, and powered and energy typically are coupled together on their financials. I'll show you this. This is 20% of their financials now, but like I said, I expect that to double this year. So the company's got 600 vehicles on the road. They've got 20 million cumulative service miles, and they just have the numbers right now. They've got the foothold. In 2012 to 2019, this is what got everyone's attention, right? 50% of the market share. And the National Transit Database, of course, is going to have an updated Excel file for 2020 and 2021. So be sure to check that out if you want to do your due diligence. Partnerships with multiple people, and this is the commercial vehicle electrification revolution for EV technology. This is a sure gainer, especially with all the money coming into the space. Now, I talked about those two business segments that I expect to grow. Proterra announced an EV battery factory in South Carolina for demand because of commercial vehicles continue to grow. And here you can see they have a $76 million investment that's creating more than 200 new jobs. And this is supposed to be in production in the second half of 2022. So that doesn't guarantee it's going to be Q3 or Q4, but hopefully they'll be ahead of schedule. It'd be great to see this be stood up in time to double that capacity. So speaking of capacity, where are we? And they are supposed to start 3 second shifts. One immediately, I believe that they were going to start in Los Angeles and Burlingame, California. They have the ability to do second shifts here. They do not have second shifts, but they also have the ability to put second shifts in Los Angeles and Greenville to increase the number of vehicles. Now, if you look, this says annual for 1 year, maximum capacity. I believe the company's been using this for their full projections based on the locations and the equipment that they have right now, because they haven't been reaching these targets. For example, 51 vehicles on average is what they've been making this year. They haven't hit 680 vehicles. They haven't come anywhere close to that. So what I'm thinking is this is the max annual capacity when you account for material, labor, time, and equipment. And that would be an appropriate max annual capacity if they had all of those things at optimum 100%. They do not. They have material constraints. They have time constraints because they don't have the number of shifts. They don't have the equipment, material they need. I mean, and obviously they're not reaching. So I think this is misleading. This isn't a max annual capacity. I think they need to tweak their numbers here and get some realistic, but I believe the modeling is for 2025 projections. This is what they're basing it off of, the potential of that facility if they had 2 shifts or even 3. So those are just my thoughts. So 1150 is the price target. So you can see an average price target gain of 13.97%. But the Barron's report is getting much more attention, and that's got price targets as high as 170% or even 70% if this reaches 6 analyst price targets of $16, and Bank of America said $15. So if you want to put your money in a place that is going to be a little bit less risk, but you're going to have the ability to get in on a growth stock, these are the levels which I believe are good entry places. And of course, I was talking about this. This is a good buy in the $8 range, but I don't believe some people are going to wait for the $8 range. And I'm not sure that it will revisit $8. So these are the channels and the resistance and support lines that I've put in. Feel free to check these out. I'm going to leave this up here for just a second, but I've got that this found support around $9.74. I wouldn't buy any higher than that. You're going to start seeing resistance at $10.60 to $11 to $11.45 in the short term. And as these move around, I will adjust these support and resistance lines. But you can see right now that this is in an uptrend, and it met some resistance. We had a lot of good news. I believe that this is responding to news catalysts now, and it just got up so high to where it started meeting resistance. And if you really zoom in, you could see that right here after January 12th, when the market opened on January 13th, this tried to run up. It met some resistance and did not close in that first 30-minute chart here at 1082. And if you follow it over here, it tapped out in the 1080 range before people took profits, and this fell down to find support at 974. So that explains the price action. It was on an uptrend. I believe it is still in an uptrend. It is still in a buy zone. I believe under $10, you're still getting in at the SPAC price. Typically, SPACs are $10. So those are my thoughts. Of course, you want to get it here when it's dipping down low. So I meant let this continue to find support. And if you miss it, then just be patient. And maybe towards the end of this month, when the Fed enacts some of the rate hikes, you might get this at a lower price. Now, of course, I was talking about this just one more time in the $8 range. Of course, that's where you want to be. So for those of you that are impatient, you know, those are some lines for you. Let's talk about the board of directors and the leadership team, because this company has had a lot of leadership movement, and it made investors a little wary. And even me, I was like, what is going on? So I've got some clarity. I feel more comfortable. And matter of fact, I didn't talk about specifically Mary Louise, and hopefully I'm getting that name right, but ML, we'll just call her ML, and she was the Chief Information Officer for Dell Corporation. And I thought that was really important to point out, because part of the board of directors' responsibility is essentially not only to hire the CEO and to manage the overall strategic direction of the business, but they represent the shareholders. They should have skills, knowledge, contacts, and industry experience to help guide and lead the business in the right direction. And I believe that this is a good ad. And you can see when Proterra announced those leadership succession plans, lots of things happened. Gareth was more involved in this last Q3 earnings call than I was. Like, it seemed a little strange. And now it makes sense, because they probably already knew he was going to step up, and they had a succession plan already. So January 1st, he took over, and Jack Allen is staying as part of the board of directors. So that's really important to know. And it looks like we've got a new chief financial officer. And when I looked at her information again, she was also in roles at Dell Corporation. So I believe there might be a connection between these two, and, you know, being able to poach some people that have software as a service experience and director of investor relations also, I thought was really important that she had that background. So she might be leveraged there. But I really wanted to point that out, that we didn't have a picture but I was able to find her picture here. So this is who we have as part of the board. I think that's important. So LA Dot, 100% electric by 2030. I wanted to go through the map and just share with you Clean Energy State Alliance that here is a map where you can go just to see that these are all the states that have made 100% carbon-free electric commitments in the nation. Now, we have the biggest in Proterra bus contracts in Texas and Florida. And you can see those aren't even highlighted. And they shared a picture of the Proterra bus from UGA Championship on Twitter, and that's Georgia. So I don't even think that this is appropriately or accurately highlighted to show what type of shift and generation, but look at all the states. It's more than 15 now that have made these commitments, so we're leaning in that direction. Now, this last week, when we had that run up in the Proterra share price, California put down a blueprint for $6.1 billion in electric vehicle initiatives, and the share price, I believe this also helped the share price, and is probably why you're seeing a lot of other YouTube people cover this stock. Now you can look at that. You can look at that plan and go in and type transportation to look at that 5-year infrastructure plan on how they're going to spend that money in California, if you'd like. I've shared this chart before, but it's really important because the Barron's report, and some people aren't getting these revenue projection numbers correct. And we are still using the January 2021 revenue projections, and you should use this from page 37. So 246, we were at 193. We closed the year out at about 196. So these estimates, we actually beat it by 3 million. Now we have about 71, 72 million that we have to make to close this year out strong. Supposedly, they might miss by their Q3 earnings call 5 to 10 buses, and because that's making up such a substantial part of their revenue still, I just want you to be aware of it. So governmentbids.com, the reason that I bring this up is in their Q3 earnings call, 28% increase. They've seen a 28% increase in their bid universe. That's what they were talking about. So we're starting to see this influx of bids, and I don't know that this is exactly what they use, but this can give you some context if they use that language in the future to talk about their bid universe or how there's an increase. They did use during the Q3 earnings call 38%. Now, some of you may have already seen me cover this before, but going into Q4, I just wanted to remind you that gross margins are still going to be scrutinized and should be at or above 4%. We also need to see revenue at 71 or 72 million. Can they do that? I think it's possible, but down here, they did remind us 2021 revenue forecast remains 246 million, though supply chain remains a constraint. And down here it talks about how they could miss 5 to 10 buses potentially for revenue recognition by the end of the year. They might miss those due to those wiring harness. So just a reminder about that. That's something that you keep hearing. If you keep scrolling down, another topic that you keep hearing about is backlog. And backlog remains strong. They didn't talk about this in the Q3 earnings call, but they did put it in this release with the Miami Transit 37 million order for 42 of the 40-foot, 450 kilowatt ZX5 electric buses, following the first order of 33, just mentioning that, look, they continue to come back and order more, and that's what they're saying here. 40% of the deliveries in this quarter were follow-on orders from existing customers, meaning that they are extending and just getting more. 24 million order from Austin Cap Metro, and that's why I was talking about this on the map before, for 26 of the 40-foot 675 kilowatt ZX5 max electric bus transit buses. First stage of that 250 million plus plan to procure almost 200 electric vehicle buses charging infrastructure over the next 5 years. So they've got a 5-year plan. So if you keep scrolling down, I want to make sure that you know that there's also this operating metrics. And in Q4, what they're going to do is they're going to compare these metrics versus what comes out in this Q4. So 48 compared to 51, 52. Hopefully it's more than that. 33 compared to more than 78. And then I do believe, and it's mentioned in the Q3 earnings call, that there were some of these megawatt charging infrastructures that did not make it into Q3 that will hit Q4. So the comparisons should, and I expect, are all going to be over year. If they're able to do 51 buses per quarter, I don't believe that they're going to miss more than 5, but they could be projecting that they're still going to hit revenue, which would put them, I would say, maybe they plan on already hitting about 60 buses, but if they hit their average 51 and they're going to be short, this could be pretty dismal for Proterra on this earnings. Now, hopefully they shock and surprise, but it didn't sound like they were going to be able to hit their 50 or 51 average bus target like they normally do. So just keep that in mind when you're going into this earnings. Now, 86% reduction in battery costs, 55% reduction in labor and overhead due to automation, I'm assuming, and then 47% reduction in freight cost per bus, just given the scale. And they're supposed to be hitting 25% gross margin by 2025. That's the estimate, and that's why there's such scrutiny on their gross margin. Now, what does that mean? What exactly is gross margin? For those of you not familiar with it, if you go to the income statement and you look at their revenue and you subtract out the cost of goods sold, or COGS, then whatever's left over, that's going to be your margin, and that is located on this income statement. And you can see it here. Revenues are subtracted from the cost of goods sold. In these last 3 quarters, that's really what we're wanting to look at, because we're trying to complete this year. And of course, you want to look historically, but this is really the year that we really started ramping up. And you can see the gross margins have been very inconsistent, and they haven't been trending upwards, and they haven't really looked flat. They look like they've been increasing, but they did better down here when we had lower volumes in the past. Now, as we start increasing volume, do we get better gross margin? And that's something you're going to want to watch. Now, on the balance sheet, they're going to be talking about inventory. You're going to want to look at receivables, and you're going to hear some terms that are in here also. So on the cash flow statement, this was a one-time positive, net income positive, but I believe, and most likely we're going to go back towards negative, because this is not going to be a profitable business until 2023. Those are their projections. Now, let's keep going. And I know that you wouldn't let me off the hook. Somebody would be like, well, what about the Vicinity Motors Corporation electric transit buses and work trucks? There's 600 of those, and that's going to begin in Q3 of 2022, and this is going to be part of that Proterra battery technology. This was good news that came out on the 13th. So not only did California send out that plan, we had this news come, we had the tweet about the Georgia bus UGA. There's a lot of great stuff that happened that week. Now, you can still find these presentations under presentation, and these are the 2 that I'm using, but just wanted to share that with you. Now, I want to talk about tier suppliers, and this is all going to make sense when we look at the earnings call in detail. Now, tier 1 supplier would be the people that partner with them directly to conduct business. So, for example, if they get the whole wiring harness from their tier 1 supplier, then their tier 1 supplier get the connectors from their tier 2 suppliers, which would be where they get their materials. And then they would take it even a step further where there's raw materials. So when they talk about tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, it's just the levels that build those components to make an end item and ultimately go to that reporting company. So just for those of you that weren't sure about tiers, and when they talk about in the earnings call tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, It's just a lower and lower element that creates that final assembly. So if there's a resin crisis, ultimately resin's used to build the connectors for the wiring harness, and the wiring harness is a shortage, but there's components to that end item. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is going to make sense when we go to the earnings call, this lithium iron phosphate, or LFP. LFP is used by a question on one of the analysts, and feel free to check out this article, what Tesla's bet on iron-based batteries mean for manufacturers. So the question by an analyst was, is Proterra considering using LFPs? And that's just something I also wanted you to be aware of. Now, of course, I believe everyone knows where to find these latest quarterly reports, and you can find them on the company's website. They will be published here for you to find once the Q4 earnings results are released. Now, like I was saying before in the financials, Proterra is reporting these two business lines. Now, we know there's 3 business segments, but you can see because it is smaller, Proterra Powered and Energy is combined for that 20%. This is the 80% that is transit. So when they say they're going to miss 5 to 10 buses out of their 80% pot of money, that is pretty significant, and I would pay attention to that. Now, deferred revenue. Deferred revenue is something that is also talked about as one of the questions in the earnings call. And deferred revenue is also known as unearned revenue. It refers to an advance payment, and this is considered a liability because they haven't earned or represents a product or service that they owe to the customer. And this can be found on the income statement. So if you were to go to the income statement and put in deferred down here, you can see if you follow this over, he mentioned that there was a drop off or a decrease, and I don't know why it's cutting the number off, but it goes from 12 to 18, and here it goes from 16 to 9. So one of the questions was, why did this decrease, and did it have anything to do with backlog? So just so that way you have a reference of what that information means. All right, so if you made it this far, the rest of the video is going to make a lot more sense. And for most of you that are familiar with Proterra, you shouldn't have any trouble. I'm going to make sure that I leave in the description the results of the earnings call transcript, so that way you can follow all the language. If it's a little difficult to hear the earnings call, I do recommend that you look or you listen to the earnings call for Q3 before you go into the Q4 call. And then here are the people that participated in the earnings call, the leadership team, and the analysts. So make sure you get familiar with them. Of course, there was a succession plan, so some of these names are going to change. Of course, Jack Allen isn't going to be there any longer. Gareth will still be there, but the AJ, he was just interim CFO. And most of these people should be visiting again and have better questions. So let's get straight into the details and the timestamps. Be sure to pause this if you want to read this and get this information, because once I post it in the other earnings video, all it's going to have is this timestamp and just this short description. It's not going to have all of this other information here. So let's get straight to it. The rise of battery production. Remember when I said quarter over quarter, year over year, we weren't doing as much business previously. There wasn't as much adoption. We didn't have the money coming in. So, you know, it wasn't real that this was going to happen. This wasn't signed into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So you're seeing that now, and you're seeing those numbers year over year ramp up. But the rise in battery production, I do expect there to be a significant peak or even a double in those other lines of business for Proterra this year. So 3-minute mark, it talks about the benefits of getting that support in the bill. So if you want to hear more about Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that's going to be your 3-minute mark. 4 minutes and 24 seconds. Remember, I was telling you about the bid universe and how it's up. This is where they're talking about that in the growing backlog. So the bid universe for 28% year over year, and that's even before the benefits of the infrastructure bill. So hopefully that makes more sense. What they're talking about is that section where they go to bid on things that they want to win. And ultimately, that's how the business wins revenue, unless they're directly contacted. So 435, growing Proterra Power. We expect Proterra Power to have supplied batteries to at least 7 different vehicle programs by the end of next year. That's actually this year, 2022. And that's up from only 1. So just imagine how that revenue is going to increase and more anticipated in 2023. 448, growing demand for megawatt mega chargers. That's that section. And I went over the DTOT, but supply 5 of their 1.5 megawatt mega chargers. 505, adding 3 new second shifts. If you didn't know that they're expanding operations. 659, adjustments to handle supply chain deficiencies. 801, revenue forecast remains 246. Now, just to go back real quick, Proterra Energy also encountered its own supply chain issues stemming from industry-wide shortages of key charging hardware components. So I know that this call got a lot of attention for the wiring harness, but even with Proterra powered, they're having trouble with key charging hardware components. So I just want to make sure that you know that that forced a push of 3 megawatts of installations out of this quarter, so they're going to hit Q4. So maybe that helps a little bit for this reaching this 246 million. You know we've got to hit that 71 million. Said it multiple times. 814, 5 to 10 buses may not be delivered by the end of the year. See how you interpret the way that's said. I believe that this is a risk for missing revenue by 5 million, putting them at 241 million. 1001, 3 phases to electrification. And it's basically talking about, how he's talking about transit buses, which is where they're entrenched. They have a foothold, then short haul, then long haul. And there's this whole thing about new transit agencies and the 100% zero emission targets. The big thing that I got away from this whole section here was 800 million available for next year, 2022, an increase of more than 500% from the 130 million allocated previously when they produced 400 vehicles. New electric vehicle buses were deployed in North America. So if they had 130 million previously, and that's going up 500% this year, starting this year, just like you've seen in California with that massive 5-year plan, I believe other states are going to deploy other plans to spend that money. New deals with Komatsu and expansion with Lightning E-Motors. 1414, revenue is at an inflection point. Now, I thought that it was really important to understand that later in 2022, we also expect to start production for 3 more vehicle programs in the remainder of their existing partnerships, in 2023. So multiple, partnerships or serial production are going to start as we expected, 7 and then 12. So 1606, this vehicle to grid project, which was big. If you want to know more about that, 1916, the gross margin, balance sheet. So in 2049, increase receivables, accounts payable, inventory, and cash balance. They collected their receivables, but then it was offset by an increase in inventory. So you can understand that the inventory is being used as a buffer, but it offsets some of these numbers. Now, 2018, improvement in their capital structure. This was really interesting. Said in another way, the company completed an effective stock repurchase of 16 million shares at no cost. This is a material improvement in our capital structure for our equity shareholders. Now, here's where Jack said, keep your eye on the big picture. Says, as we enter into the final months of 2021, they're now a publicly traded company with 700 million in cash, and they have a deal for multiple gigawatt hours per year in cell supply through 2028. 12 Proterra powered vehicle programs in place, 7 of them expected to be in serial production by the end of 2022. And on top of that, we landed 2 of the largest electric transit bus orders in North America, and the infrastructure bill sets up an expected acceleration in orders in the coming years. And this is where we go into the analyst questions. And I think that these are really interesting to look at. So battery capacity question, I went through those capacity charts with you. The order materialization, this was really important because when are they actually going to materialize, the orders for the infrastructure bill? And it says that more than likely they won't materialize till 2023 unless it's like buses or energy deployments. So if they get buses have a shorter build cycle, and if it's energy, then they could get to batteries and stuff like that. So then supply chain constraints. So can you tell me more about those? In that section, 50-ish transit buses per quarter. We know it's 51 on average. They don't plan on going backwards. So this is where they're saying 50-ish. So are we going to get 60? No, I'm not sure. So that makes me like, all right, maybe they are going to miss like 5 to 10 buses. 2852, order to deliver cycle. This is really important because here's where they have that 14 to 16 months that it takes to actually complete a bus. So for those of you that wanted to reference that wiring harness issue, this is where they talk about the wiring harness issue a little bit more, about those tiers. So tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. And I went through that. So at 32 minutes, the federal infrastructure bill materialization, bus orders to delivery cycle, much shorter. That's where you're going to get your tidbit on that section where they were like, look, we could deliver school buses much faster and we have them ready. And we have vehicles in serial production already. So at 33.49, the cap or ceiling on Proterra powered, no issues there. All right, at the 35-minute mark, the lithium iron phosphate or LFP cells versus what Proterra uses and how they're comfortable with that technology. AMC, if you want to read more about or listen to more about that, that's going to be at the 35-minute mark. 3706, deferred revenue question, where I showed you about that previously, and quality improvements, that 1 million reduction in prior warranty, really, really good there. So quality showing improvements, but the deferred revenue question, they didn't have an answer for that. So 4110, this was the last one where they did more of an explanation for the 12 powered programs for serial production. Seemed to be a lot of confusion on when serial production was going to start. Hopefully that's all clear for each one of you out there. That's all I got. I know this was a long one. Thanks for watching. I hope you can use this as a reference point, those timestamps below, and I'll see you in the next video.